Her son, Travis, flicked the power switch to off, without a word, without hesitation. Joyce Burnham, widowed and weary, didn't argue. Marla, the sweet-faced partner, smirked from the doorway, phone in hand. By sunrise, Joyce had turned the power back on and turned the tables for good. Years of motherhood, years of giving, now it was time for something else. And when Travis thought he could control what was hers, the papers, the truth, and her resolve would be waiting. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The night pressed down like a wool blanket, the air thick and unmoving. Joyce Burnham woke with her nightshirt clinging to her back, her mouth dry, her skin damp with sweat. For a disorienting moment, she thought maybe the old window unit had frozen over, but the silence told her different. No hum of the fridge, no faint buzz of the bathroom bulb. The duplex had gone hollow, like someone had sucked the life out of it. She slid her legs over the side of the bed, the linoleum cool and faintly tacky under her soles. She listened because 30 years of marriage had trained her that listening first was safer than talking, but the house stayed still. Only the buzz of cicadas outside, the low croak of a bullfrog by the drainage ditch. Her flashlight was in the drawer by the sink. She clicked it on, a weak yellow beam that swept across the narrow hall, and caught the picture of her holding a white bass from Beaver Lake, back when her ex still smiled in photos. The reflection of her face in the glass was lined, steady, harder than she remembered. The breakers inside the hall closet sat neatly aligned, not tripped, not touched, which meant the problem was outside. Her gut tightened. Joyce slipped into her robe and stepped into the muggy night. The grass, wet with dew, stuck to her slippers. She traced the beam of the flashlight toward the side of the house, past the recycle bin, and the rusted barbecue her son swore he'd fix but never did. The breaker box hung against the siding, its cover flipped wide open, every switch thrown down. Not a storm, not a surge. This was deliberate. From the shadow of the porch, Travis's voice slid out, thick with smugness. Your lights, your bill, your problem. Her son leaned against the rail, arms folded, smirk curling his mouth. His eyes gleamed, not from kindness or apology, but from the thrill of catching her off guard. Behind him, Marla sat in a faded lawn chair, knees pulled to her chest, phone casting blue light across her face. Marla's voice was syrupy, but the words stung sharp. We all gotta conserve, Joyce. Can't keep living like the world owes you comfort. Joyce said nothing. She lifted the switches one by one, until the box hummed to life again. The fridge's motor rumbled faintly through the wall. Light poured back through the thin curtains of her bedroom window. She let the cover clang shut, the sound final, like a gavel. Travis sniffed, unimpressed. Don't go acting like I'm the villain here. You got more than enough to share. Her only answer was to walk past him, robe brushing against the wood rail, flashlight steady in her hand. Inside, the cold light of her kitchen clock blinked back to life. She sat down at the little Formica table, opened her laptop, and pulled up her utility account. Line after line of payments, hers alone. Travis hadn't given her a single dime since moving back. She let the truth sit there on the screen, a quiet rebuke sharper than any words. A soft knock at the door broke her focus. When she opened it, Nora Wynne stood there in her nightgown and slippers, holding a steaming mug like a peace offering. Nora's hair stuck up on one side, but her eyes were sharp. You seen this? Nora asked, nodding toward her own porch. Joyce followed her gaze. An orange extension cord ran from Nora's outside outlet across the dirt and into Joyce's crawlspace vent. Her jaw tightened. He wouldn't. Oh, he did. Nora set the mug in Joyce's hand, pulled it right after you went to bed. Plugged himself in like I wouldn't notice my meter spinning at midnight. The bitterness of the coffee hit Joyce's tongue, grounding her. She thought about the spoiled food, the mounting bills, the sly grins, a son who treated her roof as entitlement, not refuge. A girl who played sweet while bleeding her dry. She turned her flashlight off. The dark wrapped around her again, but this time she felt the strength in it. Not fear. Focus. Her lips barely moved as she whispered into the night, the promise quiet but lethal. No one cuts my light without losing theirs. The morning after the breaker incident, the duplex felt different, not just quieter but watchful, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Joyce pulled on her work jeans and old sneakers, slid her bank statements into a manila envelope, and drove to the regional utility office. The building was a squat brick block by the bypass, the kind of place no one noticed until the power failed. Inside, the fluorescents buzzed faintly overhead. A young clerk listened, fingers tapping her keyboard, as Joyce explained the tampering, the freeloading, the cords run like veins into her house. The clerk frowned, then fetched a supervisor in a gray vest, who spoke plainly. We can separate your accounts. Shut off any unauthorized connections. They'll only get what's in their name, nothing more. An hour later, Joyce stood in her driveway, while a utility rep with a heavy belt and sweat on his temples snipped wires and sealed off taps. He explained what he was doing in short, clipped sentences, like a mechanic listing repairs. When the box cover slammed shut, Joyce felt a sharp finality. From now on, no free warmth, no free current, no easy access to her lifeline. By dusk, Travis discovered the change. She heard the clatter of a plug inside his room, the click of a cheap space heater, then a loud pop, followed by a sharp "damn it." The hall went dim for a moment, the smell of scorched plastic drifting under his door. Joyce stayed seated at the kitchen table, sipping her tea. She didn't ask if he was hurt, didn't move. The sound of his frustration was enough. "Real nice, May," he barked from behind the door. "Blow a fuse on purpose, huh? You gonna freeze your own blood just to make a point?" Before she could answer, Marla emerged barefoot, hair piled messily on top of her head, wearing one of Joyce's old sweaters without asking. She leaned on the doorframe, feigning exhaustion. "I can't take cold showers, Joyce. My skin's breaking out. And no Wi-Fi. How do you expect me to keep up with my online work? This is inhumane." Joyce looked at her without blinking. The tea's steam fogged her glasses, and she took her time wiping them clear. "Work?" she asked softly. Marla's lips twitched, caught. She pushed herself off the frame, and shuffled back down the hall, muttering, "You'll see. You'll regret this." Later that evening, Nora knocked gently, holding something clunky in her hands. A small portable generator, paint-chipped cord neatly wrapped. "Had this since the ice storm 2 winters back," she said, her voice matter of fact. "Don't run the whole place with it. Just your room. Keep it close." Joyce hesitated, then accepted. The machine was heavier than it looked, its metal cool against her palms. She placed it by her bedroom window, and listened to its reassuring hum when she tested it. Just enough to power her lamp, her fan, her laptop, enough to remind her she still had control. That night she began a notebook. On the first page, day 1. She listed the date, the spoiled groceries, the space heater incident, the Wi-Fi complaints. Every sabotage would be written down, every penny logged. Her pen scratched across the paper, the sound steady and deliberate, like building a fence post by post. By the end of the week, she had called the Housing Aid Center. A voice on the other end introduced himself as Rhett Mallory, tone-clipped but wry, the kind of man who measured words carefully. Joyce explained her situation in a low voice, careful not to let it tremble. "It's not about rent," she told him, fingers tightening around the phone cord. "It's about control." There was a pause, then Rhett said, "Then let's start with proof. Paper trails always outlast tantrums." His calm gave her something solid to lean on, like stone beneath quicksand. When she returned home that evening, the duplex was silent, the air oddly still. She set her purse on the counter, walked to her room and froze. The space where Nora's generator had been was empty, a square of dust marking its absence. Down the hall, faint orange light flickered beneath Travis's door. She pushed it open without knocking. There was Marla, curled in bed under 2 quilts, the stolen generator cord snaking to a space heater at her feet. The machine rattled softly, keeping her in comfort. Joyce's hand gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles whitened. The sound of the heater's hum filled the silence between them. Joyce stood in the doorway of Travis's room, the steady hum of the stolen generator vibrating through the floorboards. Marla lay beneath two quilts, her face slack with feigned innocence, while the heater ticked and glowed like a campfire. Joyce didn't say a word. Silence, she had learned, cut sharper than any scolding. She stepped back, closed the door, and drove herself straight to the police station the next morning. The station smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. Behind the glass partition, a clerk slid a clipboard across the counter. Describe the stolen property. Joyce's hand didn't shake as she wrote. One portable generator, gifted by neighbor, removed from bedroom without consent. She signed her name, each stroke deliberate, like chiseling words into stone. An hour later, Officer Lyle Grant pulled his cruiser into her driveway. A stocky man with weathered lines around his eyes. He had the look of someone who'd seen too many family disputes turned mean. He walked the property with measured steps, his notepad out, pen clicking steadily. Breaker box tampered with. Multiple times, he muttered, crouching to inspect the sealed panel. He pulled off a strip of electrical tape that hadn't been there before, and slipped it into a bag. Generator reported missing. Space heater drawing load off it in back room. Looks like theft to me. Travis stormed out the side door, shirt half buttoned, hair sticking up like he'd just rolled from bed. His voice cracked the humid air. You'd call the cops on your own son. Joyce stood on the porch, arms crossed over her chest, her face unreadable. She didn't answer him. Instead, she handed Officer Grant a small thumb drive. Nora had passed it to her that morning. Security cam footage from her porch. Grant slotted it into his laptop and watched jaw tight as Travis hauled the generator across the yard in the middle of the night. Marla followed, carrying the extension cord like a snake in her hands. Clear as daylight, the officer said. Behind him, Marla burst from the house, hair wild, sweater slipping from one shoulder. Her eyes shimmered as if she'd rehearsed the tears. Please, this is all a misunderstanding. Joyce didn't mean to drag us into this. She's just confused. We've been helping her. She pressed a hand to her chest, voice trembling. We love her. The performance might have fooled someone else. Grant didn't blink. Helping her? By cutting power, stealing property, and using her utilities without consent. Save it for court. Joyce's phone buzzed in her pocket later that afternoon. Rhett Mallory. His voice was calm, crisp. I'll draft a protective housing motion. We'll frame this as elder exploitation. Keep documenting everything. His certainty was a lifeline. But when she returned home that evening, her confidence cracked. The kitchen smelled sour, the kind of sharp tang that hit the back of the throat. She opened the fridge. Milk cartons bloated. Lettuce wilted into slime. Cold air absent. The cord behind the unit dangled loose, pulled free from the outlet. The sour stench rolled out of the fridge like an insult. Joyce gripped the door handle tighter, forcing herself to keep her face neutral, but her stomach turned. Cartons bulged, their seams sticky with curdled milk. Packaged chicken glistened gray, juices leaking onto the bottom shelf. She opened the vegetable drawer, spinach liquefied, carrots soft as rope. One by one, she lifted each ruined item, dropping it into a trash bag that sagged heavier with every thud. The tally formed in her head. 2 gallons of milk, 3 cartons of eggs, deli meat, cheese, vegetables, leftovers, $140, gone. She tied the bag and dragged it to the curb, the sour air clinging to her clothes. She didn't curse, didn't cry. She just fetched her phone, snapped pictures of everything. The spoiled food spread on the counter, the empty shelves, the receipt from the grocery run still tucked under a magnet on the fridge. She zoomed in on the dangling unplugged cord at the outlet, timestamp shining in the corner of each photo. Paper trails, Rhett had said. She would build one tall enough to climb over their lies. By afternoon, she was back on the phone. Rhett answered quickly, his voice steady as always. When she told him about the fridge sabotage, his tone hardened. That's destruction of property. I'll connect you with one of our tenant protection advocates. They've handled worse. She scribbled the advocate's number in her notebook. The sound of her pen scratching against the paper steadied her breathing. Every note written was another step closer to taking her home back. But Travis had a nose for her movements. That evening, he swaggered into the kitchen as if nothing had happened, leaning against the counter where the trash bag had leaked faint stains earlier. His smile was sharp, eyes glittering with contempt. A real woman, he drawled, wouldn't need to run to strangers. You handle family in-house. That's what Dad always said. The jab landed, but Joyce didn't flinch. She kept her back to him, rinsing a glass under the faucet until it squeaked in her hand. Words weren't needed. Silence, she knew, often stung worse than replies. Later that week, she walked into the Regional Utility Board office, clutching a neatly organized folder. The waiting room smelled of coffee and dust. When her number was called, she sat across from a tired-looking clerk and calmly requested a separation of residence, no more shared accounts, no more loopholes. She would stand on her own, even if it meant bureaucracy as her battlefield. Back at the duplex, Officer Grant arrived in his patrol car, clipboard under his arm. He inspected the breaker box once more and shook his head. Seen too many of these games. Folks think cutting power ain't a crime. It is. He pulled a silver tamper tag from his kit, crimped it over the panel, and scribbled the serial number onto his form. If anyone rips this off, I'll know. And they'll be answering for it. Joyce thanked him quietly, her voice firm though her chest felt heavy. The tag gleamed under the porch light, a small shield, but hers nonetheless. That night, she sorted through her receipts, lined them neatly in her notebook, and taped photographs beside them. Her kitchen smelled faintly of bleach now, but the sour memory of spoiled food clung in the corners. The next morning, she found an envelope wedged in her mailbox. The return address was from the county office. She slid it open with the edge of her house key. Her eyes scanned the letter once, then again, her throat tightening. Travis had filed paperwork listing her duplex as his official residence for state benefits. His name, her address, his fraud, printed in black ink. The county letter still sat on the kitchen table, edges curled where Joyce's fingers had pinched it too tight. Her son's name, in bold black ink, listed as resident of her home, an official attempt to turn lies into fact. She hadn't slept, not really. The hum of the refrigerator was too loud, the silence of the rest of the house too sharp. By morning she called Rhett. When he answered, she heard the rustle of papers in the background. I've been digging, he said, tone clipped. It's worse than the benefits filing. Her stomach hollowed. How worse? Rhett paused, then laid it bare. He's been using your address to write off expenses. Business filings, online resale tax deductions. It's fraud stacked on fraud. Joyce set the phone down on speaker, pulled her notebook closer, and began writing everything word for word. The pen inked strong strokes, her resolve building with every letter. That afternoon, she drove to the county office. The lobby smelled faintly of toner and floor wax, a row of old chairs squeaking as residents shifted with envelopes in their laps. Joyce clutched her folder, receipts, photographs, the fraudulent letter. When her number flashed, she walked up, shoulders squared. The clerk behind the glass asked her reason for filing. Joyce's voice came steady, low, without tremor. Residency fraud. I am the sole resident at my address. I am filing a formal affidavit to deny co-occupancy. The clerk studied her a moment, then slid the paperwork across. Each signature Joyce wrote carried a quiet fury. With every page notarized, Travis's claim to her home thinned like paper in rain. Back at the duplex, Officer Lyle Grant knocked on her door, his cruiser idling in the driveway. He held a file under his arm, expression grim. We pulled the benefits paperwork, he said, laying it open on her counter. This signature's supposed to be yours, but the loops, the slant. He tapped the page. It's not. He forged you. Joyce looked down at the clumsy imitation of her name. Her throat tightened, but she forced her breath steady. She wasn't surprised. Anger had a way of sharpening her calm. By evening, Nora came over in work gloves, eyes fierce. Time to pack their circus up. The two of them dragged boxes from the hall closet, filled them with Travis and Marla's clothes, gadgets and scattered junk, shoes, game controllers, a cracked vanity mirror, all went into cardboard. They carried it piece by piece into the shed, the musty air swallowing what once cluttered her living room. Feels cleaner already, Nora muttered, wiping her brow. Inside, Joyce lit a lamp in her now emptier living room. The silence felt brighter, freer. Meanwhile, Rhett filed what he called a two-pronged attack, a joint claim of fraud and elder abuse, sent to both social services and the housing authority. It'll move faster than you think, he assured her over the phone. They don't ignore cases with paper trails this thick. For the first time in weeks, Joyce allowed herself a small exhale, not victory, but movement. Then the sheriff's courier arrived the next morning. The knock was sharp, urgent. He handed her a stapled packet with Marla's name printed in bold on the top page. Joyce scanned the words, pulse quickening. Petition for emergency tenant protections. Marla's statement dripped with falsehoods, claims of harassment, unsafe living conditions, targeted hostility. She painted Joyce as the aggressor, herself as the victim. Joyce lowered the papers slowly, the edges cutting into her fingers. Out the window, she caught Marla's figure on the porch next door, arms folded smugly, watching. The lines of battle had shifted again. The harassment claim lay spread across Joyce's table, each page a fresh insult. Marla had filled it with melodrama, longhand complaints about verbal threats, emotional intimidation, and unjustified restrictions on daily living. She'd even written in swooping loops that Joyce created an unsafe environment for a young woman just trying to build a life. Joyce sat with her reading glasses sliding down her nose, hands folded, her expression still, but her silence wasn't defeat. It was strategy. She slid the packet into her folder and called Rhett. When he arrived that evening, rain clung to his jacket shoulders, his laptop bag heavy at his side. He read through Marla's petition, eyebrows arching higher with each paragraph. "This is a performance piece," he muttered. Then his mouth curved sharp. "And we've got her in her own words." He opened his laptop and pulled up screenshots of Marla's social media, posts from just last week where she bragged about finally getting free heat, mocked Joyce for being too cheap to share utilities, and tagged Travis with laughing emojis. Rhett's fingers tapped the trackpad, precise and efficient. "We'll attach these to the counterclaim. Courts like receipts, and Marla handed us plenty." 2 days later, Officer Grant stood in the kitchen, uniform damp from the drizzle outside. He placed a subpoena on the counter. "Power usage logs," he explained. "We'll pull the records straight from the utility company. They'll show spikes when someone ran heaters off that stolen generator. Clear tampering, no doubt about it." His tone was calm but edged with steel. "I've seen tenants try tricks, but it's elder harassment, plain and simple." Joyce nodded once, her gratitude quiet but visible in the way her shoulders eased. She knew then she wasn't fighting alone. The hearing arrived in the cramped county courtroom, walls smelling faintly of floor polish and old paper. Marla sat prim in a pastel blouse, eyes wet as though tears were waiting on cue. Travis slouched beside her, jaw tight, tapping his boot against the bench. When Joyce's turn came, she didn't speak first. Rhett rose smoothly, laying out the counterclaim, the generator theft, the spoiled groceries, the online posts mocking Joyce's cheapness. His voice didn't rise, but each word landed like a hammer. Then came Nora. She walked to the witness stand in her floral skirt, hair pinned haphazardly. She faced the judge squarely and spoke without hesitation. She lived there like royalty, rent-free, rule-free, didn't pay Joyce a dime, didn't buy her own groceries. If Joyce ever raised her voice, I never heard it. What I did hear was Marla griping about her Wi-Fi and warm showers like she owned the place. The judge flipped through the paperwork, frown deepening. When Marla tried to interject, her voice cracking with sudden tears, the judge held up a hand. "You presented no evidence of rent paid, no lease agreement, no receipts. This isn't tenancy, It's exploitation. The ruling came fast. Joyce's petition was upheld, the harassment claim dismissed, a temporary no-contact cohabitation order granted. Travis shot to his feet, the legs of his chair screeching across the floor. His face was flushed, jaw working like he might chew through his own anger. "This ain't over," he spat, pointing at Joyce with a shaking hand. "You think you won. You'll see." He stormed out, Marla trailing behind with her tissues and wounded expression. Joyce remained seated, hands folded in her lap, her breath measured. Her victory was quiet, but it was hers. That evening Rhett called her again. His tone wasn't celebratory, though. "Joyce, I was doing more digging," he said. She heard keys clattering in the background. "Your son's online accounts. He's been selling items I think match serials you gave me. Tools, old woodworking equipment, things from your garage." Joyce froze in her kitchen, hand tightening around the phone. Her late husband's tools, gone. The screenshots came through one by one on Joyce's phone, each more gutting than the last. Rhett's email subject line was simple: proof. She opened the first image and saw a battered drill with a red grip. Her husband's. Another showed a circular saw, the initials JB etched into the handle, scratched but still visible. By the fifth photo, her chest ached. These weren't just tools. They were memories. Saturdays in the garage, the smell of cedar dust, her husband's low whistle as he measured twice before cutting once. She closed the phone with steady hands, though her pulse beat like a drum in her ears. "All right," she whispered to herself. "Let's see just how far he went." The pawn shop sat off a back road behind the feed store, its sign flickering between buy and sell. Inside, the air smelled of motor oil and old leather. The walls were lined with guitars, hunting knives and glass cases of watches that ticked out of sync. The bell above the door had barely finished ringing when Joyce spotted them, lined up on a bottom shelf, tagged with neon stickers. Her late husband's wrench set, his level, his battered tackle box with faded decals still clinging to the lid. She touched the cool metal of the wrench, her hand trembling for the first time since this all began. It felt like touching bone. The manager, a wiry man with nicotine-stained fingers, walked over. "Something catch your eye?" Joyce lifted her chin. "Those aren't for sale. They're mine. Stolen." His brows rose, but before he could answer, Officer Grant stepped through the door. He had arranged to meet her there, clipboard in hand. "We'll need to document everything," he said, voice carrying quiet authority. He began reading off serial numbers, comparing them with Joyce's old receipts. The manager paled under the scrutiny, scratching his neck as Grant asked questions. "Who sold these to you?" "Guy came in last week. Brown hair, mid-30s, said his dad passed, wanted to unload the garage." Joyce's throat tightened. "His dad didn't pass, he just pawned him." Grant looked at her, eyes softened for a moment, then scribbled in his notepad. "This is theft by a family member. I'll file it formally." When the report was finished, Joyce stepped outside into the evening air. The sky was bruised with clouds, the smell of rain heavy in the wind. Nora pulled up in her pickup, a padlock dangling from her fingers. "Figured we better secure that garage before he strips it clean," she said. Together they fastened the new lock to the garage door. Nora helped her mount a motion sensor camera above the frame, the tiny red light blinking to life like a watchful eye. For the first time in days, Joyce felt the edges of her property reinforced, the boundary between what was hers and what he tried to take. That night she sat at her kitchen table and wrote out an itemized restitution request. She listed every missing item: the tools, the generator, the spoiled food. She added values beside them, flipping through receipts and catalogs, until the total stared back at her like an indictment. Each line was a scar, but together they told the story of his thefts in black and white clarity. Her pen dug deep into the paper as she signed her name at the bottom. She thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point. The line drawn so clearly no one could step over it without consequence. But the next morning, an envelope waited in her mailbox, the county seal stamped in the corner, Her name typed above the address. She slid it open with the same key she'd used to unlock her husband's tool chest for years. Her eyes scanned the header, her stomach dropping. Notice of civil complaint, unlawful eviction, filed by Travis Burnham Jr. The courthouse smelled of dust and lemon polish, the air heavy with the hush of whispered arguments and paper shuffling. Joyce sat at the plaintiff's table, the manila folder in her lap filled with receipts, letters, and photographs. Across the aisle, Travis slouched in his chair like it was a throne. Marla sat straight-backed beside him, her pastel blouse buttoned high as if modesty might disguise malice. She glanced over at Joyce once, a flicker of smugness in her eyes, before adjusting her phone on the desk. Rhett leaned close, his voice low but steady. "We'll start with the timeline. Your 30 days notice was clear. They ignored it. That's our anchor." Joyce nodded once, her hands folded. She didn't need fire. She had facts. The judge entered, a tall woman with sharp shoulders and a quicker gavel. "Burnham v. Burnham," she announced, scanning the docket. "Eviction dispute." Travis stood, adjusting his shirt collar, his voice louder than necessary. "Your Honor, my mother forced me and my partner out with no proper notice. She changed locks, removed belongings, and made the home unlivable." He gestured broadly, as though acting for an audience. Joyce said nothing. She simply slid her folder toward Rhett. Marla rose, her voice pitched with practiced tremor. "We even have messages from Joyce herself admitting it." She handed up a printed text thread. The words looked incriminating. Lines about getting rid of you both and shutting you out. For a moment the courtroom leaned forward. Even Rhett frowned. But Joyce tapped the page with one finger. "Those aren't mine." The judge squinted. "Explain." Rhett leaned over, pointing to the timestamps. "Notice the spacing, Your Honor. Same minute, different tone. And these messages cut mid-sentence." He pulled out Joyce's phone record, clean and unbroken. "This is a fabricated thread. Easily edited." The judge held the pages closer, her mouth flattening. "I see." She set them down with a snap. Travis's confidence faltered, his jaw tightening. Marla's face flushed, and she sank back into her chair whispering furiously. When Rhett presented Joyce's certified letter, her official 30-day notice, signed and time-stamped by the post office, the judge only needed a minute. Her gavel cracked against the wood. "Eviction claim dismissed. Procedural abuse will not be tolerated." Relief rippled through Joyce's shoulders, quiet and contained. She didn't look at Travis, though she could feel the heat of his glare across the room. After the session, Officer Grant found her in the hall, his notepad tucked under one arm. "He keeps this up," he said, his voice steady but edged. "We'll be talking criminal fraud, not civil nonsense. One more false filing, and he crosses that line." His gaze was firm, reassuring. Outside, Nora clapped Joyce on the back, her laughter sharp as a crow's call. "They ran out of rope, honey. Tried to hang you with it, but now it's knotted around their own necks." She grinned, fierce and proud. "I'll bake a pie tonight to celebrate." Joyce allowed herself the faintest smile, a small exhale into the cool air. For once she felt the ground beneath her steady. But victory was brief. Later that evening, as Joyce set her notebook on the table and reached for her teacup, her phone buzzed with a new message. The screen glowed with Travis's number. The words were short, pulsing in the dark like a threat carved in stone. "You want a war? You just got one." Joyce set it face down on the table and pressed her palms against the cool laminate. For 30 years she'd lived with the sound of threats muttered in kitchens, promises of consequences from men who thought raising their voice was the same as holding power. But this was different. Her son had stepped past words. Rhett called the next morning, voice clipped. "Joyce, I need you to stop using your laptop until I check it." Her heart skipped. "Why?" "I found something suspicious in Travis's resale posts. Metadata traces. Let me come by." He arrived with his bag slung over his shoulder, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a focus that made the air feel sharp. Joyce set her laptop on the table. Rhett's fingers danced over the keys, his brow tightening. Then he sat back, lips pressed thin. Joyce, he installed a keylogger. Every keystroke. He's been watching you type. The words hit like a cold wind. She felt her throat dry. Her hands curled into fists on the table. You mean my banking? Already compromised. Rhett said, voice low but steady. Passwords, logins, everything. You need to freeze your accounts. Now. Joyce dialed the bank. Her voice measured even as her pulse pounded. This is Joyce Burnham. Freeze everything under my name. She gave her information. Each word clipped. Efficient. The representative confirmed suspicious activity. Attempts to transfer funds, purchases in her name. When she hung up, she stared at the kitchen wall. The faded wallpaper flowers swam in her vision, sharp with betrayal. Nora arrived not long after, marching in with her keys jangling. We're not letting him sit behind a screen and pick you apart. She drove Joyce into town, straight to the tech aisle at the Walmart. The scent of plastic and new electronics filled the air as Nora stacked boxes into their cart. A fresh laptop, a secure router, antivirus subscriptions. You're going to start clean, Nora said, her voice firm. New machine, new passwords, new rules, and I'll sit right here while you set it all up. Back at the duplex, Joyce opened the boxes. The smell of fresh cardboard and static plastic filled the room as she set the new laptop on the table. She moved slowly, deliberately, like a woman unpacking a weapon instead of a computer. Meanwhile, Rhett began drafting a new filing. His tone was all steel when he spoke. This isn't just harassment now, it's cyberstalking, digital theft. We'll attach the keylogger evidence. He doesn't just want your roof, he wants to own your breath. Officer Grant arrived that evening, uniform pressed, his eyes dark with restrained frustration. He listened as Rhett explained the digital intrusion, then asked Joyce to walk him through everything she'd noticed: password resets, strange emails, unusual charges. She listed them carefully, her voice even though her hands shook slightly. Grant pulled out an evidence bag. We'll seize his devices, computers, phones, anything connected. Our cyber team will trace it. He looked Joyce in the eye, his voice steady. You've been patient, but he crossed into felony territory now. You're not alone in this. The next morning, Joyce sat on her porch as the sun lifted over the hills, painting the fields gold. The new router hummed softly inside, her laptop locked with fresh passwords. Nora brought coffee, setting the steaming mug beside her. For a moment, Joyce allowed herself to feel the smallest sliver of safety. But safety didn't last. Her phone rang, the caller ID showing the regional power company. She answered, voice cautious. Mrs. Burnham. A clipped voice said, we're contacting you regarding irregular activity on your account. We've flagged multiple meter tamperings registered under your name. We'll need to open a full investigation. Joyce's hand tightened around the phone, her stomach sinking. Travis had escalated again, this time dragging the utility company into his war. The investigator from the utility company arrived in a white service truck, clipboard tucked under his arm, boots caked with mud from crawling meter pits all day. He greeted Joyce with a polite nod, but his expression was tight, the kind worn by someone used to finding bad news. He crouched at the breaker box, while Joyce stood on the porch, the morning air still cool and damp from last night's rain. Minutes later, he straightened and shook his head. Your son's been bypassing the meter with jumper wiring. Classic theft setup. He rigged it so the draw never registered on your bill. He gestured to the burnt marks on the box, the crude twist of wire dangling like veins. You're clear of liability, Mrs. Burnham. All of this traces back to his tampering. Relief loosened something in her chest, though it left behind a sharper ache. Betrayal crystallized into evidence. She thanked him quietly, her hands folded in front of her robe like she was in church. That afternoon, Rhett sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, fingers moving with controlled urgency. This isn't just petty sabotage, he said. This is felony energy theft. He tampered with regulated equipment. We'll file for criminal charges and link it with the fraud we already documented. He slid the screen toward her, showing the drafted motion. His eyes were precise, but his tone softened. Every wire he spliced makes your case stronger. For once, Joyce didn't feel like prey. She felt like a witness waiting for the hammer to fall. But the hammer swung wildly elsewhere. First, Marla, ever the performance artist, blasted a Facebook post within hours. Unfairly targeted by bitter family utilities harassing us for nothing. She posed with her arms crossed in front of the duplex, a pouty defiance staged for likes. Instead of sympathy, the comments lit up against her neighbors calling her out. Locals posting screenshots of court filings, one even tagging the pawn shop where Travis had unloaded Joyce's tools. You lived off her and now you're crying victim. Sit down. Another pay a bill for once, Marla. Joyce scrolled, her lips tightening, then tapped her phone's side button. Screenshots, every threat, every erratic message, every public post. She saved them all into a folder named Evidence. The next evening, Officer Grant stopped by, his cruiser headlights sweeping across the yard before he knocked. I reviewed what Rhett filed, he said, standing tall in her doorway. With the tampering, the theft, and the harassment, you meet the criteria. Restraining orders eligible now. His voice was steady, the weight of authority behind it. He comes within 100 yards, he's in violation. Period. Joyce nodded, calm as stone. Do it, she said, simply. Grant gave her a small nod in return, then stepped back into the night. For a brief stretch, peace seemed to settle. Joyce brewed tea, the scent of chamomile filling the kitchen. Nora dropped by with blueberry muffins and gossip about Marla's online humiliation. They've run out of sympathy, Nora said with a grin. Finally. But peace was a fragile thing, and Travis knew how to shatter it. Sometime after midnight, Joyce startled awake to a sharp crack, like a bat striking glass. She bolted upright, the sound vibrating through her chest. Heart hammering, she crept to the hall, slippers silent on the floor. The side window above her laundry room sagged inward, shards glinting across the tile. A cold draft poured through, carrying the smell of wet leaves and something darker. Anger aimed at her. Travis was gone, but his absence felt like a threat louder than his presence. The laundry room floor still glittered with glass, sharp little teeth that caught the moonlight. Joyce stood barefoot in the doorway, robe pulled tight, the cold air spilling in through the jagged hole. The silence was heavier than the sound had been. The crack of the window still echoed inside her skull. But what replaced it was worse, the weight of knowing someone wanted her to wake up afraid. Within 20 minutes, Officer Grant's cruiser rolled into the gravel drive, red and blue lights strobing faintly across the duplex walls. He walked the perimeter with his flashlight, beams sweeping the bushes and tire ruts in the mud. He crouched by the window, fingers brushing the shards, then straightened with a grim set to his mouth. Glass broke inward, he said, voice flat but certain. That's no accident. Someone forced it. And with everything else documented, I'd bet money it wasn't random. Joyce folded her arms, keeping them steady though her pulse raced. He wants me rattled. Grant met her eyes. He wants leverage. But he's running out of angles. He made notes on his clipboard, then added, I'll request a patrol watch. My guys will swing by at night. He won't be able to creep around here without eyes on him. The patrol car idled until sunrise, its presence steady as a heartbeat outside her home. Joyce sat in her kitchen, sipping tea she didn't taste, her notebook open to a fresh page. Broken window, 2:14 a.m. Officer on site. She wrote each detail, her pen scratching in the quiet. By noon, Red arrived, his tie loose, laptop bag heavy against his side. He looked at the taped-over window, then at her, his jaw tight. We'll add vandalism to the record, he said. He opened his laptop at the kitchen table, the glow of the screen lighting his face as he typed. Every broken pane, every spoiled gallon of milk, every forged document. This is building. The judge will see it. Joyce handed him photos. She'd printed that morning, glass on the floor, timestamp visible on her wall clock in the background. Rhett slid them into a folder, without hesitation. We'll stitch it all together. He thinks he's unpredictable. Paper makes him predictable. That evening, Nora came striding across the yard with a box tucked under her arm. "You're not waiting on the county to protect you." She plunked the box on Joyce's counter. Inside, a motion sensor light, the kind that snapped on bright enough to spook raccoons or men lurking where they didn't belong. She pulled a small canister from her purse and pressed it into Joyce's palm. "Pepper spray. Keep it by the door, by your bed, in your bag. No shame in evening the odds." Together, they mounted the sensor light above the back door. When it flared to life against the dusk, it threw long, sharp shadows across the yard, as if warning trespass at your own risk. Joyce didn't stop there. She bought reinforced locks the next morning, the metallic smell of new steel lingering on her hands as she screwed them into the doors. She mounted a small camera in the hallway, its red blink steady. Every corner of her home felt newly guarded, no longer soft ground for invasion. Rhett came back midweek with thick folders, heavier now with affidavits, evidence lists, and printed screenshots. "This is the final push," he told her, adjusting his glasses as he organized the stack. "Restitution, damages, fraud, vandalism. It's all in here. The court will have to face the full picture. He can't spin this web much longer." The words proved truer than either expected. 2 days later, the sound of sirens grew near, and a sheriff's unit pulled up with another cruiser in tow. From the kitchen window, Joyce watched officers knock on her son's door down the block, watched him stumble out, hair messy, voice raised in protest. The sight of his wrists pulled behind him, metal glinting in the sun, carried no joy for her, only the quiet gravity of inevitability. "Travis Burnham," one officer called. "You're under arrest for theft, tampering, fraud, and harassment." Joyce stood at her window, hand resting lightly on the sill, and whispered, "Finally." That night, she slept for the first time without waking to every creak and groan of the house. But peace never lasted long in this fight. The next morning, a plain envelope waited in her mailbox. She slid it open with her key, her breath catching at the header inside. Notice of hearing. Burnham var Burnham. Civil damages. Her court date was set. 14 days. Joyce's kitchen table had transformed into a war desk. Neat stacks of paper sat in rigid lines, photographs clipped to folders, receipts highlighted in careful strokes of yellow. The hum of the new printer filled the room, spitting out page after page like ammunition. Rhett sat across from her, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low as he slid another stack into a binder. "Print everything twice," he said. "One for the court, one for backup. Judges respect order. They notice when you don't flinch." Joyce nodded, sliding a photo into a sleeve, the spoiled food lined across her counter, timestamp glowing faintly in the corner. Another photo showed the broken window, shards like teeth against the laundry tiles. Piece by piece, she fitted them into binders until the table looked less like her home, and more like a command post. "You're not just telling a story," Rhett said quietly. "You're proving a pattern. Sabotage, theft, fraud. It all adds up." He wanted chaos. "We'll hand them order." Later that evening, Nora arrived with her usual briskness, dropping a spiral notebook onto the table. "Practice time." She pulled out a chair and sat opposite Joyce. "I'll play judge. You answer clean, direct, and don't let him bait you. Ready?" Joyce clasped her hands in her lap. Nora squinted, voice booming. "Mrs. Burnham, did you ever physically throw your son out of the house?" Joyce shook her head. "No, ma'am. I followed proper notice, documented every step." Nora's lips twitched in approval. "Good. Now, did you ever deny him food or water?" Joyce's answer came without pause. "I bought groceries. He let them rot." For an hour, Nora fired question after question, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, until Joyce's replies came like clockwork, steady, factual, unshaken. When Officer Grant stopped by the next day, his cruiser lights washing faintly across the yard, he stepped into the kitchen and studied the growing fortress of evidence. "I'll testify," he said simply. "Seen too many cases where the victim folds under pressure. Not this time. My report's clear: tampering, theft, forced entry. The court will hear it from me directly." Joyce thanked him, her voice low but firm. His presence steadied her like a beam under a sagging roof. The printer whirred again, spitting out the last set of photos, Travis's pawn listings, her late husband's tools lined up on cheap velvet. She slid them into the binder, her fingertips brushing the glossy surface. Memories lived in those tools, and now they lived in evidence too. She added the final pages, her itemized list of spoiled groceries, every tally marked in careful pen strokes. The generator receipt followed, creased from handling, but undeniable. Each entry was a wound stitched closed with ink. When the binders were finished, Joyce laid them side by side. She chose her outfit with the same deliberation: crisp white blouse, black slacks, simple shoes. Nothing loud, nothing fragile. Just clean lines and quiet authority. She rehearsed walking across the living room with the binders in hand, her back straight, her steps measured. On the morning of the hearing, Rhett arrived early, binder strap slung over his shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. Joyce met his gaze, her hands wrapped tight around the handles of her folders. "More than he is." The courthouse steps loomed ahead, stone cold under a gray sky. Inside, the hall smelled faintly polish and paper. Rhett reached for the door, his hand steady, his voice calm. "Stay sharp. Don't give him your silence. Give him your evidence." He pushed the door open, and there, already seated at the plaintiff's table, was Travis, grinning. The courtroom buzzed low, like a hive disturbed but not yet swarming. Joyce sat straight-backed at the table, the binders Rhett had helped her build stacked neatly before her. Across the aisle, Travis leaned forward in his chair, elbows wide as if claiming space that wasn't his. Morla smoothed the hem of her pastel skirt, her mouth tight, her eyes already wet with rehearsed tears. The judge entered. A gavel cracked. The buzz stilled. Rhett stood first, his voice level, calm. He laid the binders on the bench, page after page, photographs of spoiled food, receipts, security footage, power usage logs, pawn shop records. Each piece of evidence slid across like bricks in a wall, shutting out every excuse Travis had prepared. "Your Honor," Rhett said, "this is not a family dispute. This is exploitation, theft, fraud, elder harassment. My client has documented every loss, every sabotage, every threat." His hand rested briefly on Joyce's binder, then fell back to his side. Morla rose suddenly, holding up a tissue. "We only wanted shelter. Joyce turned on us, treated us cruelly, left us without basic dignity." The judge cut her off with a raised hand. "Sit down. You're not on trial for cruelty. You're on trial for lying to this court." Travis shot to his feet. "She's making me out like some kind of criminal. I'm her son. I carried this family when my father walked out." "Sit," the judge commanded, voice sharp. Rhett didn't flinch. He gestured calmly to the subpoenaed utility logs, then to the signed affidavit Joyce had filed weeks earlier. "The evidence doesn't lie. He bypassed meters. He forged signatures. He sold stolen goods. And he turned his mother's home into a stage for fraud." The silence that followed was heavier than the gavel's strike. The judge flipped through the paperwork slowly, page by page, before looking up, her expression like iron. Judgment in favor of the plaintiff, Joyce Burnham. Her words were deliberate, final. Full restitution of damages and stolen property. Permanent no-contact order. Defendant Travis Burnham is referred for criminal sentencing on fraud and theft charges. Marla Keene is fined for false legal claims and barred from future petitions regarding this residence. The words rang like bells in Joyce's chest. Not victory, not vengeance, something steadier. Justice wrapped in ink and law. Across the aisle, Travis's face drained of color, his jaw tightening until the vein in his neck pulsed. Marla gasped, clutching her tissue tighter, but the judge's gaze cut her into silence. Rhett slid the stamped order across the table to Joyce, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Your power's protected now." At the courthouse steps, Nora swept her into a hug so fierce Joyce had to laugh against her shoulder. "Knew you'd light your own fire," Nora whispered. "And look, you burned their lies down to ash." Officer Grant lingered near the doors, his hands tucked behind his belt. He gave her a small nod, his words steady but warm. Some lights only get stronger under pressure. Joyce met his gaze, a quiet smile breaking the surface. For the first time in months, she felt the ground under her feet wasn't just hers. It was safe. But as she walked to her car, binder still clutched in hand, her phone buzzed with a new email notification. She opened it, scanning quickly. Local nonprofit Energy Equity Coalition. We'd be honored if you'd share your story at our upcoming community event. Joyce stood by her car door, sunlight catching the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. Her fight wasn't just hers anymore. She stood at the edge of the community hall stage, palms damp against the thin paper of her notes. The overhead lights hummed, casting the 100 gathered faces in a soft glow. Farmers with sunburned cheeks, young families with restless children, retirees with tired eyes, all sat waiting. The murmur of voices ebbed when she stepped forward. Joyce took a slow breath. Not about wires, she reminded herself. About will. My name is Joyce Burnham, she began, voice steady though her hands trembled. I spent months in the cold. My own son saw to that. He thought taking my power would take my strength. But power isn't in the lines or the bills. It's in refusing to bow when someone wants you small. Her words rolled through the room, quiet at first, then growing with momentum. She spoke of the spoiled food, the stolen tools, the forged signatures. She told them about nights spent writing down every slight, every theft, every broken window, until her notebook became her shield. She described the courtroom, the judge's gavel striking like thunder. The moment silence fell heavy, and she realized she was no longer a victim but a witness to her own justice. I'm here because I want you to know, Joyce said, pausing, letting the silence fill. You don't have to live in fear of your own kin. You don't have to keep your head down because someone louder wants you smaller. You can take your story back. One receipt, one page, one step at a time. The room erupted in applause, not wild but strong, rising like a tide. Joyce lowered her notes. She hadn't read from them once. From the back, Nora held up her phone, recording every word. For the world to see, she mouthed, grinning. Hours later, the video was uploaded, and by morning thousands had watched. Comments rolled in from strangers, some angry, some grateful, many echoing the same thought. She stood where I couldn't. She fought where I froze. At the aid center, Rhett slid a small stack of papers across his desk toward Joyce. Part-time admin job, he said, his tone warm but practical. Filing intake, helping folks navigate the same mess you climbed out of. You've got the grit, and you know the system now better than most. Joyce hesitated, her fingers resting on the forms. For years she'd been the one surviving, not leading. But the idea of sitting behind that desk, guiding someone else through the storm, brought a steadiness to her chest she hadn't felt in decades. She signed. That evening she stopped at the hardware store. The smell of cut lumber and machine oil filled the air as she picked a heavy steel lockbox from the shelf. At home, she set it on her dresser, placed her most important documents inside, bank papers, receipts, her protective orders, and labeled it in black marker, "Never again." The next morning, when she stepped outside, the dew clung to the grass, and a white envelope peeked from her mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just her name scrawled in hurried script. She opened it with a careful hand, but the contents stopped her short. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't junk. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you. You gave me courage. Signed only, your neighbor." Joyce held it for a long moment, the paper trembling lightly in the breeze. She hadn't realized who had been watching, who she'd silently carried with her when she took that stand. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a spark catching in dry grass. That night her peace was tested again. Another envelope slipped into her mailbox under cover of dark. This one bore a name she knew before she even touched it. Travis. Her hands didn't shake as she walked inside. She didn't slit it open, she dropped it into the shredder, listening to the blades grind it into confetti. For the first time in months, she smiled as the sound filled the room. Dusk bled across the sky. the Arkansas hills sinking into shadow. Joyce sat on her porch, the wood creaking softly beneath her chair. Above her, a strand of string lights glowed warm and steady, little suns she had hung herself. They swayed in the breeze, steady against the dark. The air smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle, faint and sweet. She held her mug close, steam curling against her face, the quiet humming around her not of silence, but of peace, the kind she'd built with grit and paper and unbending patience. The screen door squeaked and Nora stepped out, balancing 2 plates and a pot of tea. "Thought you could use dessert with that victory," she said, settling beside her. She slid a slice of pie across the table, peach still warm. Joyce smiled, soft but genuine. "You've carried me through more than pie, Nora." Her neighbor waved her off, but her eyes shone. "Pie's just my excuse to stick close." The string lights buzzed faintly as Joyce's laptop chimed from inside. She rose, padded across the living room, and returned with the screen open. One email blinked bold at the top, from R. Mallory. She clicked. "Travis Burnham has exhausted all legal appeal rights. Judgment stands. No further action pending." Rhett's words were short, professional, but they landed like a stone lifted from her chest. Joyce let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She closed the laptop gently, as though sealing it shut on the past. The next morning, she walked into the bank. The teller's perfume was sharp, the marble counter cold under her fingertips. "Savings account," Joyce said, her voice even. "In my name only." She slid over the paperwork, each signature neat, deliberate. The key to the account slipped into her hand moments later, cool, heavy, hers alone. That night, after Nora left and the house settled into its new quiet, Joyce picked up her flashlight. She stepped down the gravel path, the beam cutting across the field. The bluff overlook waited where it always had, the wind rising as she approached. Below, the valley stretched dark, dotted with faint house lights. The flashlight beam swept the edge, strong and sure. She stood there a long moment, the smell of damp earth mixing with the sharp tang of approaching rain. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, a warning of storms not yet here. Behind her, the porch lights glowed. The string bulbs swayed in the wind, but they did not falter. Joyce lifted her chin, the flashlight steady in her hand. The storm could come. She was ready. "He wanted me cold and afraid," she whispered into the wind. The words didn't shake. They rang. "I walk lit and unbothered now."